Welcome, everybody, to our economic discussion here today on our team's global news network. And I want to introduce Mahmoud Mahmoudi. Mahmoud's an economist, community builder, and tech entrepreneur. He has a passion for social impact of technology and how inequality impacts innovation and economic growth. He's co-founder of Undermove, one of the pioneering geotagging companies. Following that, he was a starter and executive director of Open Data Science Incorporated, one of the largest artificial intelligence communities in the world. He has taught entrepreneurship in a number of universities and around the globe. Currently, his main focus is supporting enterprises to create economic equality. Welcome, Ahmad. How are you doing today, man?
Great. Thanks, Joel, for having me. I'm excited to have this discussion today with you.
Yes, totally, man. Yeah, some interesting times we're in these days, right? I'm sure you've been running and reading a lot in the last 2 weeks.
Yeah, the world was in a very interesting place before. A lot of big changes was upcoming. So now with the whole pandemics going on, it's even more interesting times ahead.
It's I totally agree, and I definitely want to get into that. Just thinking about the pandemic and the current economic situation of the world. How has the pandemic kind of showed some shortcomings or some strengths of the current economic systems that we have?
Yeah, very good point. First and foremost, especially in the last few years, the world has been gone again toward, each country caring about themselves and thinking about in the very national level. But one thing that this pandemic was showing was that actually the world is significantly more tangled. The different countries in the world are significantly more tangled than what we assumed before. And in reality, we are really one giant global nation. And this is actually also a blueprint for the future crises that we all know that are inevitable and they are coming, with all the global warming and the environmental crisis that are, happening more frequently, and they are going to just start to be more and more upcoming. One key element there that we see is that this is just gonna be a very global issues going onward, and like everyone in the world really are in the same boat.
Yeah, it's interesting. I've one of the things that I've seen recently is just the number of job claims that people are filing here in the U.S. And I'm guessing it's going to be a similar situation in other countries, especially Italy, Spain, China, and other places that are heavily hit by this pandemic. Is there any way to bolster ourselves going forward that we can protect people who are thrown into this type of situation, as opposed to scrambling as we are in this moment? Is there a way that we can better set ourselves up to kind of protect our workers and our people going into these potential upcoming catastrophes that you're talking about?
Very good point. Yeah, you brought up the job loss claim. It's very important to understand the scale of that. I'm not sure if everyone is really aware of how huge this whole thing is. In the peak of economic crisis of 2008, 2009, in a given week, we didn't even have any week or even any month that had more than 1 million people job loss claim. In the whole 2-year period of that happening, all in all, based on different statistics, we had something between 5 to 9 million job losses. Just last week, as you mentioned, we had 3.3 million people claiming that. There are some predictions, we will see this Thursday, but there are some predictions saying that we are gonna see something between 9 to 10 million extra job loss claims this week. So these numbers are unprecedented as long as any of one of us have seen that. And it just shows that how unprepared we have been as a society for that. This is very important to note that like most of these situations, when there is a strong economic or any other sort of crisis comes, one of the very first impacts that it has is that it's going to separate the more fortunate and less fortunate further from each other. You know, like always, the low income people are the ones that are going to be hit the hardest. I was looking at this map of the distribution of the coronavirus in New York City. And the very interesting thing was that the areas that had the lower income populations were the environments that were hit the hardest, because they are the people that cannot go anywhere. They cannot go to Hampton, Florida, or anything. They can't even stay at home. They have to go to their work and everything. So they are the ones that are the front line of that. They are the ones that are exposed the most. A lot of them are not covered with the insurance. A lot of them don't have any savings. So they're the ones that are gonna get hit the hardest. And my honestly biggest concern after the health of everyone, obviously this is a health, first and foremost, it's a healthcare crisis. But after all of this hopefully comes down in some months, I am very, very concerned about the economic situation and the impact that it has on the economic inequality. And as you mentioned yourself, it just shows that us as a society, we're not ready for that.
Yeah, it's that's interesting points there, especially the poor neighborhoods there. I know you're in New York City, so I'm sure you're really well aware of all that as you speak. But thinking about poor people being hit the hardest there, I also think about, I know how it is being poor and being raised poor is you have a lot of people in a small space just to afford the rent, and whereas a wealthier person is going to be one or two people in a bigger apartment, right? And so I think it makes sense with that too, that it may spread more rampantly in areas like that. So what can we do? Like, how can we protect ourselves, or how can we better position ourselves as a world? Thinking about the world economy, it is so tightly tied together now. Is how can we help people, especially the poor, become more robust when things like this happen? They're always the one who are getting hurt the most. How can we protect them more?
It's very interesting, one of the things that it has brought up strongly, this whole pandemic and this whole crisis, are some of the ideas that have been sitting on the fringe of the economy and the fringe of the mainstream discussion and never broke it into the mainstream, has been brought to the center of the discussion. Things like universal basic income. It's very interesting. Andrew Yang was a presidential candidate like 6 months ago. On the debates, he would bring up the idea of universal basic income, and literally most mainstream media was dismissing that, saying that this is out of the box, this is not feasible, this is not affordable, and all of this. Now, fast forward 6 months, a lot of countries have brought the idea of universal basic income for all their citizens into the discussion. In United States, one of the biggest discussions right now is, we are all aware of this single time $1,200 check. And as we are all aware, this is not going anywhere, this pandemic, within the next 1 week or 2 weeks. So when the end of April comes and the next round of bills for people come, I am sure there's going to be a lot of pressure for having that. So what does universal basic income, as an example, represent? We are all talking about safety nets. We have moved forward in society as seeing safety net as a negative thing, as an item that brings down the innovation in the society, that brings up the laziness and all of this. While actually, this is not about any of that. It is about helping people have a peace of mind that, hey, if something happened that is out of your hands, you are having some control over that. Your whole life will not fall apart because of that. You know, I am actually cannot stop thinking about a lot of those millions of people that lost their jobs. A big part of that is that means that also they lost their health insurance.
Mhm.
A lot of that means that we know that in America, based on, again, different statistics, we have different statistics has something between 40 to 65% of society is living paycheck to paycheck. So when there is one, the paycheck is cut, that means that, hey, your bills are not made, your rent is not there, your grocery money is not there. And this is putting an incredible mental, emotional pressure on them as well. I was reading that a lot of suicide hotlines are asking for volunteers because the number of dial-ins that they receive have skyrocketed. You know, these are the issues that are not exactly represented when we are discussing the economic term, when we are discussing the growth, when we are discussing GDP. None of these elements are put into consideration. But now people are talking about that. We are saying that GDP is meaningless if the suicide rate is skyrocketing. It's meaningless if the depression rates and alcoholism rate and drug addiction rate and drug overuse rate is hitting the sky.
Yes.
We need to be able to first find better measurements to determine the success and the thriving of a society on a bigger than economic level. Andrew Young, a person that I really like and respect, had a very interesting phrase that he said that human value is different than economic value and is much more important. And I really think that is coming to the mainstream, that we need to look at some of the human values and elements that are replying and addressing that humanitarian issues that are going on. So back to your question about what we can do, is that we need to address a lot of these issues in a consistent way. An idea is UBI, Universal Basic Income. It has a lot of advantages. It puts money directly in people's hands and stuff, but it also has a lot of disadvantages that we will talk about. But also, there is another element that we need to talk about. This is a global crisis. It has hit a lot of countries. I was reading that for the first time in history, over 80 countries at the same time have asked International Monetary Fund and the World Bank for financial support. They have never had such a record, and they don't have the bandwidth to support that. So we need to have some more global ideas to address these global crises that are upcoming.
Yeah, it's pretty intense, you know, and but the cool thing is, again, it is forcing our hand to consider things like this. You know, considering UBI, a question that I would wonder, and I'm sure everyone out there will wonder, is that something that we can afford, right? I know I've talked to a number of friends about this because I'm into this idea too, but they're just like, well, we can't afford that, right? And do you have any thoughts on that? Have you did much research on the actual affordability of it?
Yeah, actually, it is a very traditional discussion of affordability. You know, it honestly has been used as a scapegoat of whatever that people are just for whatever reason against, rather than discussing that, they are like, so how can we afford that?
Mm-hmm.
Let's talk about, we are like, there's a stimulus package that was passed that we are talking on, that it will cost anything between $2 to $4 trillion. So we are talking about anything between $7,000 to $13,000 per person in the whole United States.
Mm-hmm.
And this is like, in the economic matter, it's not that this money comes from the sky or anything, because these are the ways that we run the society to make sure that, the society runs. So yes, there are some, I don't want to get into the technicalities of that, but there are many ways that some pioneers of UBI have sat down and
Mm-hmm.
have done the math on that.
Yeah.
On that, not even UBI, there are a lot of other programs out there, that there are ideas there, and the financial institutions that they are dedicated to do the math around that. So what I would like to say is that, just not to go into the technicalities of that, maybe in some of the future meetings we go and do some numerical presentation. But in summary, yes, there are ways that we can afford that, but it needs us as humans to understand that these are the global crisis. This is not going to be the last time that we are having a global economic crisis in this level. It's very interesting because this time it's very, 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 very much talked about, because it's one of the very first time that the first world countries are fully all together impacted by that. One very interesting element is that, for example, in the discussions of development in Africa, one of the biggest misunderstandings is people think that like very impoverished, especially sub-Saharan African countries, have the problem of growth. Yes, they do have that. But actually, if you look at the statistics, a lot of them have had years of continuous, constant growth. What is the most harmful to them is that the hiccups that they have there, there is a drought coming, there is a flood coming, there's an earthquake coming, there's environmental things that hit them, and they bring them back from to the point zero of that. So it is not that they don't know how to grow. It is that all those downfalls, hurt them significantly each time. And this time that has happened in the global level. And we need to understand, if we want to thrive as a society, we need to be able to address those downfalls. We cannot just put our head in the sand and imagine that that is not happening, or it's a one-time thing. It is going to happen constantly in the future. And we need to adapt to them in a way that, one, address them meaningfully, and second, doesn't leave anyone outside there.
Yeah, I like that. And earlier you mentioned that about the poor being hurt and having these worries and mental issues based around this, right? The suicide hotlines and such. And the other thing that I think, just based upon that, is when you're worrying, and even without a pandemic, when you're worrying about paying the power bill this month or getting groceries for your kids, it's hard for you to do anything else, right? It's hard for you to be creative in a way that could add to society. You're just scrambling and are in a tough situation. And I think that if, as a society, we could figure out this question, that we would basically unleash a very creative time in our history, because all these people who have been held back by these thoughts and emotions and this scrambling will all of a sudden be released in a comfortable spot to then be able to create and add to society, as opposed to being a drag on it. So I think it could be a big win-win.
That in the spirituality world, in the like self-help world, there is this state that they call survival mode, meaning that if someone is in the dire financial need, they are in the survival mode. They are like, where is my next meal gonna come from? Like, how am I gonna pay my rent? Do I even have a place to sleep? And when your very, very basic human rights are not covered, expecting them to thrive, to be innovative, to come up with the startups, to all of these are just not rational. Historically, when the study of economics came up, in like 250 years ago, the very first discussions of the modern economy came up, one assumption that they had was that humans decide rationally. But the more that is going, especially in the last 10, 15 years, they realize that actually that's not true. If you're in a dire financial struggle, you are not gonna decide rationally. You are gonna decide out of your survival mode. And it's not enough to just go tell people, hey, decide rationally, or be like, hey, don't be in the survival mode. It's a state of being,
Mm-hmm.
And it's very hard to assume for a lot of people that have not gone through that, hey, in that phase, a part of your brain shuts down. A part of your brain is not able to, you are in the high stress level. You cannot be innovative. You cannot, thrive. So if we do not address those basic human needs, expecting everyone to stand up and thrive is just unrealistic. And that is one of the strongest arguments around a lot of those safety nets.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it just makes total sense, and so much so that, the question I would have is what's holding it back? What is, it seems so rational to lift these people up, to put them in a position to flourish like everyone else. And it seems like it would bring off a big drag of the economy of society. What's holding it back?
I would say few different things. One is the fact that a lot of people, unfortunately, fortunately actually, have not experienced, dire poverty or survival mode in any way. And if you are not there, you kind of cannot understand what people go through that. So again, is that, when some of this in this global crisis are times that people realize, wow, we are actually in the same boat together.
Mm-hmm.
The other thing is the promotion of individualism. I was reading this Margaret Thatcher interview that she did actually in 1987 that was saying society, the way that we think, is not a real thing. We are a bunch of individuals working and living together, something in along those lines. But then, again, when the crisis like this comes, it shows that actually society is a thing, that we are all in the same boat. And, you cannot just leave some people out, because once you leave some people out, it drags everyone down, So I am actually hopeful that all of this is pushing a lot of people toward the right direction. And the other thing was that a lot of traditional government and financial institutions are just slow in responding to things like that.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not even saying that they are necessarily against it. They're just slow in implementing these radical changes. So what I believe is really how it's going to work in future are more of the grassroots movements, more of the movements that start on the private side, that will bring that into the mainstream, that will bring that forces the governments and institutions to follow that. Expecting them to the leaders are not realistic. They will be the followers in this movement.
Which is often the case, right? There's so many economic situations, cryptocurrency, others that are created by the private individuals who are looking for a better alternative. And then usually the governments come on later, right? The Chinese, the Koreans looking to create their own cryptocurrencies. So Mahmoud, I think this has been great, man. Is there anything else you'd like to add to this? Just to sum up, where we're at.
Yeah, I think this was a great discussion, and we did a lot of economic discussion here, but we also really want to say that at the end of the day, it is a healthcare crisis. My heart goes to everyone that really are, dealing with themselves, their families, and the people close by to them, dealing with this issue. And I hope that everyone recovers fast. And just reminding everyone that at the peak of all of this, we see a lot of acts of kindness, a lot of people that, stood up and said, we will do anything that is needed. I was reading yesterday that 67,000 retired or out of or not working medical staff, doctors, nurses, everyone have volunteered to go and, go back to work and put their life in danger to support people. So these are these acts of beauty that actually gives us hope that a better future is possible.
Yeah. Well, let's hope that energy can keep moving forward even after it's over, and to create a situation where we're better taken care of for the next issue that we have as a society. So
definitely.
Ahmad, thanks so much, man. And let's do this again. This was great.
Yeah, absolutely. We will continue having these discussions. Looking forward,
man. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.